Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Great. You ready? Okay. All right. I would like to call this meeting of the Monona Grove School District Board of Education Board meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. on August 22nd. Has there been a declaration of public notice? Yes. Great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I know we have a number of things that we want to get to today, but prior to starting that, I want to make sure a brief statement to the community and allow my fellow board members to do the same if they were interested. And I want to say that I know that there has been a lot of emotion, understandably so. I've gone through a number of those right now, and I wanted to share a few from my perspective, not just as president of the board. I'm a community member in Cottage Grove. I have 2 elementary school children who are gearing up to go back to school, like many of your kids are too. So the first thing I wanted to share, and this may feel like an odd place to start, but is appreciation. I am incredibly grateful to Superintendent Frederick and Assistant Superintendent Sobocinski. Their swift response and their open communication with the board has been incredibly invaluable, and is part of the reason why we're here today. I've had the pleasure of supporting their transition since I was elected board president in April, and we have shared values of integrity, transparency, and communication. And we have made such great strides already in improving policies and practices as a result of those pieces. The other piece of appreciation I want to share is to you all in our community. I shared this many times in many different ways, but for me, truly, feedback is a gift. And I'm grateful for everyone who's here, everyone who's watching, folks who have emailed, folks who are engaging, not necessarily with us, but with each other out in the community. An engaged community is a better community. It makes us more communicative, more collaborative, promotes accountability in ways that are really important. So thank you for that. The second emotion I want to share with you that I've been feeling is remorse. I think we've shared this many times in many of the different communications that have happened, that there wasn't one thing that brought us here, but a series of things. But at the end of the day, the board is accountable for the financial health of the district. And for that, I want to say I'm sorry for the role that the board has played in where we're at today. And the third motion that I want to share with you, and the one that I've actually been feeling the most over the last couple of weeks here, is resolve. And for me, appreciation and remorse are really important, but those are retrospective, right? That's about looking back on what has occurred and thinking about where do I want to continue to move forward, and where are places where I go, oh, wow, let's not do that again. When we know better, we can do better. But to me, resolve is part of what brings us here today too, right? A deep commitment to move forward in ways that are productive, in ways that are collaborative, and in ways that are going to move our work forward and make our community a stronger, better place to be. So we are resolved as a board to doing those things. And so I am, again, grateful that you all are here today, and I am looking forward to hear your feedback and appreciate your engagement with us, not just now, but also as we move forward along this process. We know the journey is going to be long in terms of both financial recovery, but also just rebuilding trust. And we are here for that, and we appreciate you. Thank you. Philip.
So I have 3 sentiments that I want to express this evening. And first and foremost, I want to apologize to the community, to the Monona Grove staff, and our students for letting you down. As a board member, I had an opportunity to take actions that may have identified this issue sooner, and I failed in my responsibility to do that. I'm embarrassed, and I deeply regret that I didn't push for more information and ask tougher questions earlier in my time on the board. Second, while the board is ultimately responsible, and I as a board member share in that responsibility, I am also angry. I'm a parent with young children who will be in this district for years to come. And when I joined the board a year and a half ago, I did so because I wanted to be a part of doing good by the kids in our communities. When I was made aware of this situation, I was shocked and upset, and I continue to be. Of course, this doesn't change the fact that the board could have and should have done more, but I want you to know that I share in your anger and your frustration. Third, I want to express my appreciation for our teachers and staff. As a parent, I am constantly impressed with the talent, commitment, and care that I encounter throughout our schools. I have no doubt that there are going to be many bright moments for our students this coming year, and those moments will occur because we have truly gifted and wonderful people working with our children. I also want to acknowledge our new superintendent and assistant superintendent. I can't say enough about the work that they have done in the short amount of time that they have been with us. They have unfairly inherited a mess created by others and have quickly demonstrated tremendous skill and integrity in managing this situation. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone from the community who's here tonight to share with us.
Anyone else from the board like to make a comment?
I don't think I could add anything to what you guys have just already said.
Yes, Rochelle?
Again, thanks for you guys coming. It's really important to be part of this conversation, so I appreciate that. In 2023, I was elected to serve on the Monona Grove School Board. Much as with any new employment, there has been a great deal to learn. Since I didn't have experience sitting on the board, I'm an educator and a parent, I used the first year to learn how the board operated and how to effectively apply my skill set to benefit our district. I consider it an honor to serve as a community's representative, and I take my responsibilities seriously. Finding out the budgets I voted for in 2023-2024 were erroneous and were reducing our fiscal balance was unexpected and disheartening. Discovering there were audit red flags associated with those budgets that I missed is really upsetting. Had they been emphasized, I'm certain I would have voted differently. The trust I put in the experts and leadership to make clear our situation was misplaced. I understand the importance of being fiscally responsible, just like all of you. I wish I had been more thorough when looking through all the pages of information presented to me, and I'm sorry that not all the board policies were followed. Rebuilding community trust, replenishing our fund balance, and ensuring all of our students receive an excellent education are goals I'm devoted to. I'm pleased with the new leadership of Tanya Frederick as our new superintendent. Tanya and assistant superintendents have superintendent's efforts to lead and identify the communication of the deficit with us. Although realizing the scope of the issue wasn't easy, at least we know what it is and can begin to address it. I'm dedicated to improving the openness and communication with our communities and the MG staff going forward. Setting up safeguards to ensure that anything similar won't happen again, and keeping our students at the forefront by coming up with innovative ways to deliver top-notch instruction while staying within our means.
Anyone else before we open up to, yes, Susan?
Well, most of you know that you don't know where to start when you have the opportunity to speak to you. I was in a meeting Tuesday evening and walked in overwhelmed with sadness and regrets and lack of confidence in myself, which most of you know you don't see very often. And when I walked in, one of our teachers and the football coach turned around and gave me a hug. And I thought, that's where we are. We're a team. We're a community. Together, we can look at this, we can face it, and we can make it work. And whatever you want to say to me about my lack of oversight, I will gratefully accept and put it together and try and make it better. I think as a team, what's great about this board right now and our board leadership, our new superintendent and our assistant superintendent, is that we really care. We care a lot. And as Rochelle is speaking, it's all I can do to keep from not being totally overwhelmed with sadness. And the truth is, this community raises our children. You raised our 3 boys. One of them is saving lives at the University of Iowa. I even get feedback from people I don't even know, who don't have my address, who track me down to say, I want to tell you this. The other one is feeding your kids with Sargento cheese. And the third one is approving your pre-authorizations for medical treatment at a major national health insurance company. So you've brought this positive piece to all of us, to our families, to our communities. Sorry, he's in Iowa. And it's so important to have you here. And the one thing that you can absolutely hold me to every minute, every day, every second, is that we will fix this. Thank you.
Next, before we turn it over to public comment.
Yeah, just
Oh, sure, Janice.
a very brief one. I am really new to this, but I will tell you, having worked in this district for 30 years, that and worked for many different superintendents, the difference in atmosphere and how we are receiving information and the communication and the transparency and the collaboration about this really important issue from both of our administrators sitting here has just been amazing. And so I would just like to share appreciation for their hard work in this really difficult situation.
All right, so you had the opportunity to hear from us, but this is a really important time for us to hear from you. We will be moving into public appearances, so folks that have registered, I will call you up in the order that you registered so that you can make your public comment. Prior to that, I want to kind of lay some ground rules on how public comment works. We don't often get a lot of it, and so I think it's important for us to reiterate what those pieces are. And I'm going to read this because I want to make sure that I get it all. Okay. So the board sees tonight's meeting as the public's initial opportunity to provide feedback to the board. Because of this, the board will generally not engage with speakers, but will be listening. We are grateful for the public's feedback. Additionally, the board is constrained by the open meetings laws and cannot extensively discuss or take actions on matters that are not listed on the meeting agenda. Furthermore, the public comment period is not the preferred or established means of communicating concerns about current or former employees. Such concerns should be brought through the administrative chain of command. Additionally, the district has limited options for addressing performance of former employees. All participants are encouraged to ensure that all information offered is truthful and honest. False statements or stigmatizing charges may subject the individual making such statements to legal repercussions, including but not limited to defamation claims from the target of such statements. Additional opportunities for community feedback will be created as future plans come together, and some of those will be two-way communications, town halls and those kinds of things, so that you can interact with us outside of email exchanges and one-way communication here. We're committed to sharing information and updates in real time, which hopefully is a message that you have received thus far and will continue to receive as we move forward. Everything continues to be posted on the website. Everything will be emailed as appropriate. And then members of our community who do not have current students can sign up to receive budget-related email updates by submitting their email address to the budget website, or I believe if you do this QR code, it will also allow you to do that. So if you have neighbors, friends, community members that aren't going to get regular communications for school, please encourage them to sign up so that they can stay in the loop on those things. The last thing that I want to just remind everybody that this is being recorded and live streamed and will be archived on YouTube in perpetuity. So just be mindful of that as you make your comments tonight. And with that, I apologize in advance for announcements. I had shared earlier today that after this meeting, I'd like to make a change to our public comment registration form to have a pronunciation key to help make sure that we're saying people's names correctly, but I apologize in advance for not doing that. So first we have Cecilia Brose. Hi, welcome. Oh, everyone has 3 minutes to speak as well. So although I forgot to say that. So although we extended the time that we're allotting for public comment, we're still trying to keep people to 3 minutes. And Tish will do a nice job of keeping you on, so.
Flag me, okay?
Yep. If I give you a little 1 minute finger, it's just a 1 minute wave, and not to cut you off, just because we want to make sure everyone has their time and space.
Absolutely.
All right.
And it's Cecily Brose for the
Oh,
pronunciation.
I'm Cecily. Thank you so much.
Just totally fine.
And I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Cecily, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Cecily Brose, and I live at 806 Lindsay Way in Cottage Grove. I'm a longtime resident in this district and have two sons. One is graduated and a current sophomore at the high school. I've also spent a substantial amount of time volunteering in our show choir and musical programs, and earlier in PTO in the elementary schools. I've watched many board meetings. Yes, I'm one of those people that watches most of them. And I've found myself often thinking, they must have a lot more information given to them in order to make effective decisions than what is presented verbally or in the presentations. I've witnessed at times board members digging in and asking great questions. And at others, motions seem to be quick and not discussed fully. I guess I always assumed that you all had more information than what was presented. I don't think I can run under this assumption anymore. My trust has been broken, and I am appalled at the lack of oversight that this board has demonstrated time and time again. From the poor strategic planning to the teacher handbook mess that occurred, and to now this, a gross oversight of the the budgeting and auditing process. I want to sincerely thank the new superintendent and the new assistant superintendent for quickly taking action and being transparent about the situation. This gives me comfort that we now have the right district leadership in place to rectify this situation and put this district on a successful path forward. Like many others here, I look forward to influencing a solution to addressing this financial crisis. Thank you.
Much. All right, next up we have Paula Severson. Hi, Paula, welcome.
Paula Severson, 628 Crawford Drive in Cottage Grove. I'm the parent of a daughter who's going to be a senior at MG this year. So I'm not really here for her. I'm actually here for all the kids behind her and the kids coming up. I have some very strong concerns. First, I want to say thank you to the new superintendent for finding these things and raising the red flag right away. More than likely, it was a fresh set of eyes on these issues that brought them to the forefront. And I think that needs to continue. So within 15 minutes of the email coming out to parents in the district, I emailed the school board and immediately offered assistance. One of the things that I think needs to happen immediately is that you set up a crisis task force made up of not just board members, but community members, community leaders, business leaders, and others who can sit down, have a fresh set of eyes on all the books, peel back the layers, ask the tough questions, and find solutions to these problems. And I'm willing to serve in that capacity, and I bet many of the people here tonight are. When you have a fire and there's a house on fire, a local fire department doesn't just go in and hope for the best on their own. They call for help. This is your 5-alarm fire, and you need all the help you can get. Use it. The second thing, and I'll come back to why in a minute, I believe there needs to be a forensic accounting of the school district books. That needs to be done immediately. If anything, to restore trust, you may not find anything. I get it. And it's going to be expensive. I get it. But it needs to be done. A lot of speakers are going to focus on different areas that are troubling to them, and I want to focus on mine. So in 2021, the auditors found something that they brought to the board's attention, and specifically about account reconciliations. And I want to read from that document from 2021. So the condition, we noted that bank and investment reconciliations were not completed until more than 2 months after year end, and accounts payable amounts were not reversed from the prior year. That's bad. Okay, why is that bad? They list it. The effect is, if account reconciliations are not performed timely, the probability that material errors or fraudulent activity will occur and go undetected greatly increases. That's why you need forensic accounting.
Paula, you've got about 20 seconds left, just so you know.
So for the people sitting at the table that were on the board in 2021, this came up in 22 and 23, and nothing was done about it. In March of 2023, there was a meeting with those findings, and one of the board members sitting at the table said they were trying to skim through the audit. This is not an opportunity to skim through. If you do not have the ability or want to read through every line of every document you are given, step aside and let someone else who will put that time in. Thank you.
All right, next up, Lydia Bertram. Hello. Thank you for coming.
Lydia Bertram, and it's 504 School Road, Cottage Grove. Okay. Hello, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am the mom of 3 elementary school students in Cottage Grove. I am also an advanced learning instructor, as well as the treasurer of an educational nonprofit and a former library media specialist. I moved to this district 2 years ago for the sake of my kids and their education, and I have supported the referendums that raised my tax dollars. Upon hearing the news of the budget crisis, I was shocked and angry. But above all, I was and am worried for my kids. I am worried about cuts to staffing. I am worried about school safety with a lower adult-student ratio. I am worried my children will lose out on opportunities and support the district can no longer afford. And with these worries also comes incredulity. I have both managed school budgets and overseen educational budgets in my various roles, and I do not see any excuse for this oversight. Ms. Cook, in your interview with HNG News, you described your reaction, and you described it here as well, as similar to everyone's: confusion, frustration, hurt, and anger. And you told the Wisconsin State Journal that if the issues had been emphasized in that budget and in previous budgets, the board would have made different decisions. I went through the materials you were given for the past 3 years, and the gap between the Fund 10 revenues and expenditures is extremely clear. In the budget publication from last October, it is the very first box on the page. In the 23-24 annual meeting packet, it is clearly displayed on pages 10 and 12 of the packet. In the 22-23 preliminary budget, the budget deficit number for 22-23 is printed in red. And yet none of you addressed the large increasing Fund 10 deficits in any of the 22 or 23 meetings. Not a single question was raised about Fund 10 in those years. Now, in this year's preliminary budget packet, Fund 10 for 22-23 is balanced to the dollar. Why did none of you see anything odd here? Knowing how much money was in play, and based on the other budgets you had seen, how did you not realize that something wasn't right? Why didn't you question this? Why didn't you do your job and provide obviously needed oversight? In Ms. Cook's email on behalf of the board, she talked about rebuilding trust. Last year, in this room, you all freely admitted to not understanding your own handbook votes and placed the blame on the superintendent for misrepresenting the issue. The previous superintendent for misrepresenting the issue. And here we are again, a year later, and you are giving us the same song and dance on yet another issue. I'm afraid we are past rebuilding the trust you spoke of and are now looking to place our trust elsewhere. I am requesting that all board members who have been approving all of the budgets since 2021, 2022, resign to allow new leadership who will do their due diligence to the community. Thank you for your time.
All right, next up, we have Mike Mickelson.
Hello, I'm Mike Michelson, Cottage Grove. My wife and I moved to this district in the early 90s. This is now our third financial crisis. Third, not the first, the third. Some of you are still on the board. Each and every time I've heard the promises, the polite words, they're meaningless. This district has been poorly managed for better than 30 years on and off. My children, as now the future children, had to do with less. 3 different crises that my children lost experiences. I heard from teachers that could not get equipment, could not buy things because we had to make cuts because of some administrator and the board failed to do its jobs. When I would contact board members, their response was, "Oh, I don't look at the numbers, call the administrators." This board has operated for years on autopilot. Look at the policies that you've passed. You have delegated your authority to those administrators to do this. And it's going to happen again, regardless of how good those staff are, because you are not doing your fiduciary responsibility. I have been a school board member. I have been a village president. I have been a village trustee. You have broken your word. You have broken the statutory and moral obligations that you have. You have failed to look at your documents. As Paula said, I've watched you at your meetings. When expenses come up, you move on to something else. You never ask questions. That's on all of you. That's a failure on each and every one of you. The long-serving board members, if you really want accountability, if you really want to rebuild trust and talk about all the kind words of collaboration and cooperate, that's great. It's meaningless. The 3 long-serving members on this board should resign. You have the most obligation. 3 different sets of audits. I called and asked Dan about those. To be honest with you, I'm one of the people that did ask about why you aren't reconciling your accounts. Why during the referendum do the numbers not match with what the auditor said? I even raised that question to a couple of board members who said, you need to talk to Dan. I went to a couple of the superintendent coffees and raised that. Dan promised to give me information. He did some, not others. I don't think many of you did that. Otherwise, you would have known or should have known. So again, let me make it clear. If you want trust back with the community, as an elected official, you have an obligation. The real way in which you get our trust is to allow new people who are going to ask questions and do the job to fill those positions. And I'll make the final point. There's no diversity of thought on this board. That's why there's no questions. You all go along to get along. You pass policies to let the administrators run the business for you and then don't do anything else. But who's going to suffer? Let's get to the bottom line. Who's going to suffer? The money that you're going to have to now save is going to come from children and from the staff. And if the staff don't believe that's going to happen, when you take out the 10-year note you're voting for tonight, the debt service each year is not outside the revenue limits. That means that money is coming from something else. You've already stated you're willing to take money from that referendum you passed. It says right so in the documents that you created. So everyone in the public should understand, you've already signaled what you're going to do. Nothing. You're going to simply take the money that you got from the referendum, not do what you said you were going to do, and go on and continue to do business as usual. And 10, 12 years from now, somebody else, not me, is going to come in here and say, here we go again, another financial crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Michelson.
Unless there's real accountability, resign.
Next up, Jennifer Millage.
Hi there. I want to thank the new superintendent for the transparency in this issue. I think that we are long overdue from this board for this transparency. I am somebody who has 3 children in this district. I work in finance. My husband has a business in Cottage Grove as well. We are deeply rooted in this community, and we are disgusted with you. We put our children's trust in you, and it took me all of 30 seconds to look at the publication that was put out to know that there was a serious problem. 30 seconds to know that. I am very passionate about this issue, and I think as parents, we are absolutely disgusted with what you guys did. You need to remedy it. You need to make it better. Your solution was, you were telling us that we're not going to have another referendum. If a short-term loan is the solution, guess what? That's also taxes for the community. That's a way around a referendum and people voting. So I would second what Paula said. I firmly believe we need another committee formed that also involves community members. And I also think that people who have been on this board for a long time need to take a look at this. And if this is still the place for you, and if you can still serve us, we put our trust in you and you failed us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Michael Swanson.
Hello, good evening. First off, I want to say I appreciate all of you taking the time and inviting this feedback from the community. I think that's important, and I'm glad that you're all listening. First of all, just kind of background as far as who I am. I grew up in Monona. My sister and I both went to this district. My father and his family went to this district. And my children now go to this district. After being moved away for quite a while, we recently moved back to the town of Cottage Grove, and myself, along with my family, own a business that's seated in the village of Cottage Grove. My two children, one is already at school age, and I have another daughter who will be in the school shortly. So I believe that I have pretty deep roots in this community and a quite strong vested interest in making sure that we kind of handle this crisis appropriately. Well, I'm obviously troubled and disappointed by the budget revelations that were recently related to the community. I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiments that have already been expressed here. I want to use my time to discuss or ask questions as to how we're going to move forward and what kind of concrete steps and how exactly this is going to be handled moving forward. So much of what I'm going to say is going to be phrased as questions because it's the best way I know how to communicate what I think is important. I realize at this point a lot of this is rhetorical and probably doesn't have answers yet, but I kind of offer them as examples of things that I would want to know, and I feel like a lot of the other community would probably want to know as well. So looking at this as objectively as possible, I kind of see 4 points or steps that obviously need to be addressed, and some of these are probably being discussed and addressed at this meeting later on tonight. And I think it's important for you to consider these moving forward and how you communicate with the community. So in kind of priority order, the kind of points that I'm asking about is how will the district continue to operate and remain financially solvent in the immediate future before the January tax payments are made, I assume. How you plan to pay down the debt that was incurred back in the fall of 2023, as well as whatever debt is going to need to be incurred in the near future to maintain the operation of the district. And then how you plan to replenish the depleted reserve account in light of the higher debt load you're going to have to incur, I assume, in order to continue to operate the district with extra outstanding debt payments. And then finally, and kind of throughout that entire thread, how you're going to employ controls and process changes to ensure that something like this doesn't happen in the future, past your individual terms or time with the board. So regarding the immediate future, things I'd be interested to know is how much of that $12 million loan that was outstanding is still in existence, if you're going to refinance that. I know there's a budget plan under discussion tonight, so I'm interested in knowing how you're going to handle that moving forward. Are there any federal or state or any other grants or loan guarantees or kind of special financing options available to the district that we can use to try and solve this? And then kind of lastly, what specific changes are you going to implement in your accounting and reconciliation procedures in order to make sure that these issues are avoided in the future? Can and how will those be detailed to the community? I realize a lot of this is sort of boring, and I know my time's almost up. I'm almost done. As it will likely boil down to strictly implementing accounting controls and practices, but I think it's worthwhile communicating that to the community. And lastly, I want to say I realize the new superintendent and other administrators, this might not be what you signed on for, but I hope you're willing to stick through it with us.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. All right, next up is Stephen or Stefan, is it Saibon?
Yeah, I think it's been.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you. Next is Judy Runk.
Thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it. I have been involved with many school boards in my past, and I want to say thank you for letting us have our chance to speak. Yes, I'm disappointed this happened here, but would like to make a suggestion for a way to help. I suggest and want to help with reviewing finances regularly. Would like to see a business service committee again with community members to help and review all of the issues in the finance area. I am going to volunteer. My background, I was 15 years at West Bend School District in business administration. I was 15 years at the state as a financial supervisor. I was 2 years in a private school district. And my education is master's in education and business administration. I would very much like to get involved and see what I can do to help the situation.
Matt Ida.
Thank you. I'm Matt Ida. I live at 802 Westing Avenue here in Monona. I work as a nurse at a local emergency department. I have two children. One is an incoming freshman at the high school, and the other is an incoming junior at the high school. We've lived in Monona for about 7 years now, moved from the east side of Madison, and love our community. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I would first like to start with an example of the majority of this board's lack of engagement with the community members. In March of 2023, I wrote an email to the entire school board concerning concerns that my wife and I had with the asynchronous learning days that were being used as snow day makeups. And one board member took the time to email me back, and that is Dr. Eric Hartz. No one else felt the need to engage with the questions that we posed. That speaks volumes to me about the school board members who were on the board at that time and their lack of communication, engagement, and willingness to serve their community. Moving on to the present issue at hand, I would like to ask how our current staff at the school, both teachers, administrators, support staff, are going to be reassured going forward, both immediately and in the distant future, that their financial well-being is not going to be impacted by the events that have happened here. Because the last thing that I want to see happen is people looking for jobs elsewhere in other districts because they have lack of faith in their financial ability to support their families here. The next question I have is, I would like to know who performed the fraud examination to determine that none of the overspending went for personal gain or fraud. That examination 100% needs to happen by an independent third party, in my opinion. If this was done in-house, that is completely unacceptable and doesn't mean much considering how we got here. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Okay, Jeff Otto.
Hello, I'm Jeff Otto. I live at 4350 Damascus Trail in Cottage Grove. Haven't, a lot of what's been said I already kind of agreed with, and I live and work in district. So without reading the handbook, I'm just kind of saying my 2 cents, and I'm going to keep it at that. So like I said, I've been in this district and lived in this district since 2014. I've been employed here since 97, and I've seen a lot throughout that time. I was really happy when that last referendum passed and the feeling of having a somewhat stable future for the district was assuring. And the community felt pretty supportive of the district at the time, and those employed by the district felt good about it too. Now I'm disappointed that, to learn that the district is haphazardly, the district administration has haphazardly been operating the budget. And it's concerning, especially considering how many extra hands have been added at the district office over the years. It seems like we've just been adding position. And to top it off, these people are nowhere in sight. And I've said this a lot. I'm pretty opinionated, but I'm going to say as a community member in the future, aside from the money and all that, I'd like to see some residency requirements for district administrators. I feel this would allow for a little bit more respect for the community that provides for them and helps people stay true to the community that you're serving. So I would love to see that going forward. So some accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for all of our speakers tonight. And now we'll move on to discussion item, which is revised preliminary 2024-2025 budget. And I believe, Tana, you're teeing us up here.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to, before we get into this, I appreciate people's thanks for the level of transparency and forthrightness that we've brought forward related to this budget. I think I can speak for Ms. Sobozinski and myself that that's how we do business. It shouldn't be outstandingly surprising. And I think as we both think about how solid procedures, process, and policy go moving forward, you should expect to see and hold us accountable as administrators and what we report to the board and to the community with a higher level of transparency. We will put things in board docs so that what the board's looking at, you're looking at. We have the information that is public in there tonight. Now we were dealing with just-in-time documents, and so some of them were loaded like as we were walking in here because that's how fast and furious this information is coming. To address the fact of the revised preliminary budget, we have been combing through this. We are on day 50, like maybe 50. So it's not perfect, but it is far closer to the actualities of what has happened for expenditures and also revenue. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Sobozinski, and she's going to walk us through a slide deck that really takes us through where has the breakdown happened over the last couple of years, and what does a budget that we have in place right now look like as far as revenues and expenditures. And then we will also get into what is the short-term solution and thinking about long-term.
So today we want to walk through some of the background. I know a lot of you have looked at the documents, but really want to walk through those, give you a little bit more detail and the impact on fund balance, on our budget for this year, cash flow, and then talk a little bit about the revised preliminary budget for this year as well. Starting with what you all know, which is why we're here today. We have had 3 years of deficit spending, starting in 21-22 and leading up to this year of a $4 million deficit. This is unaudited. The audit has started, but it's not complete. I don't anticipate much variation from this number, but there are certainly can be cases where auditors may find something that was charged to another fund that has to be charged to Fund 10 that would adjust these numbers, but I don't anticipate anything significant. We talked about budget overages, and I think someone asked, who's done the forensic accounting of this, and I can say there hasn't been a forensic accounting done, but I can say that I have combed through all of the expenditures and have taken a look at everything I can within the past 50-some days, and I have not seen anything to date that has been anything other than things spent on the district. I'm not saying I didn't miss something. There still is work to do, but I can tell you at this point in time, I have not found anything. So what did we spend the money on? There were some regular expenditures that we have every single year that just weren't budgeted for. One of those is open enrollment. So we have resident students that attend other public schools, and we pay tuition through our state aid for that. That line item wasn't budgeted for. Every year, we spend about $1.3 million on that line item, and $300,000 was budgeted. So that's $1 million that was just not budgeted. We've always used student software, human resource software, financial software, and that wasn't budgeted for. So that was one area. There were some new expenditures that just weren't budgeted for. Not bad expenditures for things like security improvements, cameras, door swabs, things like that. A lot of studies were done for facilities, compensation, enrollment. Again, not bad, but not planned for. And then we had expenditures that exceeded what we had expected. Our substitute budget was over by $140,000. Our technology and internet budget was over, and our special education salaries and benefits were over what was budgeted. To delve a little bit deeper into this, and I don't know why that's cut off, but we have, this gives you a little bit more detail regarding the differences from approved budgets to actual activity. So I have 22 and 23 up here, and you'll see I highlighted in yellow the areas that were most significantly over budget in the 2 years. So in 22-23, it was salaries and benefits and what's considered a transfer. So the district has to transfer money from Fund 10 into Fund 27 which is the special education fund, so that special education fund is balanced. So that really tells me that our special education budget was overspent, and I'll show that to you as well. In 23-24, the overages were in purchase services. That encompasses a whole host of things such as tuition. It would include payments to vendors for construction services or other projects. That was over budget by $4 million. And then again, our transfers were over in the 23-24 year. Fund 27, as I said, it's special education, and why that transfer was over had to do with salaries and purchase services. And the purchase services amount was mainly tuition for students to attend other schools. This impact on our fund balance has been significant. We had a $10.3 million or 23% fund balance in 2021. At this point in time, we're estimating a $2.5 million fund balance or 4% in 23-24. On this chart, this yellow line represents board policy minimum percentage for fund balance, and you can see in the 22-23 year, we dipped below that. The district has gone to referendum, one for a non-recurring referendum of a total of $14.8 million, so $3.7 million for 4 years. This 3.7 doesn't get added each year. It's there 1 year and then it goes away and then we add it again. The 23 referendum was a recurring referendum, meaning that over 3 years, this would add to our revenue each year. During the referendum, we had these slides that showed the dark line here is that non-recurring referendum, and then the accumulation of the recurring referendum over time. The 23-24 year was the first year of that recurring referendum where $6 million was added to our revenue limit. As I said, non-recurring is only a 1-year addition and recurring adds to our base. We did add that $6 million in 23-24. However, in 22-23, that was our last year of ESSER funds. So we had $2.7 million that we were using for additional staff that we didn't have that revenue for, and we kept those staff members. So we had to use part of that $6 million to offset the $2.7 million reduction. Over time, you can see our revenues have increased due to the non-recurring and recurring referendum, pretty substantially in comparison to other districts, 10.1% in 23-24. However, when you look at our expenditure increase, you can see where we exceeded those revenues. We've increased our expenditures 11% each year for the past 3 years, which is significant. From a Fund 27 or special education perspective, our increase in expenditures has been even higher. We spent $7.2 million in 21-22, and we now spend $10 million in 23-24. In June, the board approved a preliminary budget that was balanced, and the expenditures totaled this $58.4 million. However, the budget was presented to the board showing the 23-24 budget at $55 million and a 24-25 at $58 million, not looking at the fact that from 23-24 we were so significantly over budget that just $58.4 million isn't really representative of what costs we can expect in the 24-25 year. So we're putting together I put together a revised preliminary budget that was based on our actual expenditures. So we're looking at actual salary and benefits for staff and really trying to look through the budget and claw back any expenditures that were one-time expenditures that we didn't anticipate moving forward. It's not a final budget. It is a budget that we need to have in order to get cash flow borrowing and our operational loan. So we show our realistic expenditures for the 24-25 year and show that need. But again, it is not the final budget for the year. We will have an adjusted budget in October. We'll use the time from now until October to really go through all those non-mission critical items and remove those from the budget. There's some other things that the district gets in terms of our third Friday count, our hiring, our aid that will be incorporated into that budget, and we'll be presenting and hopefully approved by the board on October 30th. Cash flow for most districts is is a need. Districts get funded by property taxes and state aid, and they don't come at consistent times of the year. The bulk of our revenue is from property taxes, and those are paid in January, and our fiscal year starts in July. So we have an extended period of time where we're not getting the bulk of our revenues, and we have expenditures. So a lot of districts have to cash flow borrow. That's not unusual. Our district, we borrowed $12.2 million in the fall for short-term cash flow needs, and we do have to pay that back before we can issue another cash flow borrowing for the 24-25 year. Unfortunately, because of our fund balance situation, so we had this $10 million in fund balance that we could use for cash flow, but we were over budget by $4 million last year, so we don't have the cash to pay back that full $12.2 million. So we will need a loan to not only pay back that short-term borrow, but also to operate the district throughout this next year. That loan will be up for consideration for the board this evening. Someone did say that it is within the revenue limit. So that means that that payment is a reduction of funds that we can use for operational purposes. We will have more information on cash flow during the next agenda item. So now I'm going to get into the revised preliminary budget. To do so, I wanted to sort of start with a typical budget development timeline. Obviously, I haven't worked for the district, so I haven't been through this, but this is, in my experience, what I have done throughout my career. It's really a year-long process. We're in November. You start with enrollment forecast, because enrollment really drives revenue for school districts. And then you take a look at your 5-year forecast, which gives you the roadmap of how you're going to build the budget for the next year. And then that work happens in January and April. It looks different for every district, and we'll have to build that process here. The preliminary budget is typically approved in June because our fiscal year starts in July. And then in September, we have our annual meeting, which is statutorily required. It's typically the same information as the preliminary budget, but there's just a little, different things that we have to do in terms of getting the community involved in voting on the levy and things like that. As I said, in October, then we have that adjusted budget and levy certification. So why is the final budget not approved until October when the fiscal year starts in July? It's because we don't get all the information that we need to finalize that budget. Enrollment, as I said earlier, we don't get until the third Friday in September. Our equalized value isn't received until October 1st, and our general state aid isn't finalized until October 15th. The revenue limit calculation is really the driving force behind our revenue. It's statutorily set. It was set in 1993 to put a curb on property taxes, and it really determines about 80% of our revenue. So it's really important year to year to take a look at those things that go into that revenue limit calculation to determine how much revenue we're going to get year to year. It relies heavily on a 3-year average enrollment and a per pupil increase set in the state budget, and there's really 2 primary ways to increase revenue. Either enrollment is increasing, or the state gives us a per pupil increase in the biennial budget. Fortunately for the district, from about 2013 through 1920, there was an increase in enrollment. So as I said, more enrollment, more revenue limit. So that really helped the district during that time period. There was sort of flattening out where that recurring referendum came into play and the non-recurring referendum. So that helped the district during a time where revenue flattened out. This past year, there was a little jump in enrollment, and we do project about 50 more students this year as well. So that is good news in terms of revenue. From a per pupil history standpoint, this is what the state sets in the budget, and this goes back to 1995. For many years, it was always tied to CPI, so the Consumer Price Index, so that districts could, as our expenditures were increasing, you could plan on a CPI increase each year and plan your budget accordingly. When Act 10 hit for the 11-12 year, this is an average decrease. All districts were reduced by 5.5%. And we really haven't even caught up to where we were prior to Act 10. So it's really been a strain on a lot of districts, which has forced a lot of districts to go to referendum, to do non-recurring referendum, to get the funds that they need to continue to operate as they have in the past. The past 2 years, or 23-24 and 24-25, we do get $325 per student. So we know that going into the 24-25 year. The unknown for 25-26 is what that per pupil amount is going to be. And that would be a crucial number for many districts in the state. So if you are politically involved, you might want to talk to the legislature or people that you know about that per pupil amount. When the state talks about giving more aid to districts, it's not more money, it's property tax relief. It's really, the key is this per pupil amount when you talk about more money for schools. So how are school districts funded? We have the revenue limit that determines the big pot. So you have your big pot of money, and then that is split between property taxes and general state aid. And as I said, general state aid is property tax relief. It is not new money. So you calculate your revenue limit, you subtract out your state aid, and that is your property taxes. So then how is state aid determined? Well, that's another formula that the state sets, and it's based on a variety of factors, but the most important being your property value per student, how wealthy a district is, and cost per student and enrollment. So in general, districts that have a lower property value per student receive more state aid, and districts with a higher property value per student receive less state aid. The state average property value per student that's estimated for 24-25 is $977,000. Monona Grove's estimate is $951,000. So we're just under the state average. And our 24-25 aid to cost ratio, so how much we're funding of state aid based on our cost, is 43% versus 40% in 23-24. So that number is going up for us. And the reason being is this chart shows our equalized value per member in blue, and as that goes down versus the state average, our aid cost ratio goes up. So it sort of shows you that inverse relationship. And that's why our state aid history has been on the increase, in addition to additional dollars going to general state aid. We have a number of funds in the district. Tonight, I'm going to focus mainly on Fund 10 and Fund 27. Those are our operational funds, but we do have a variety of other funds in the district. And I have also attached the budget adoption format that has all the funds in it and all the details so that you can see that as well. From a revenue standpoint, we have been pretty close to budget when you look at, 23-24, 55 to 56, that was, to the good. And then our June preliminary budget revenue of 58.4 million, and the revised budget that we're presenting tonight is 58.7 is pretty consistent. Where things fall off a little bit, we talked about 23-24 being off of what we budgeted. The preliminary budget, again, at that 58.4 million was just not realistic based on our 23-24 actuals. So again, took a look at actual salaries and benefits of staff we have in place, applying a consumer price index to that, and then looking at these other areas, so the transfer to Fund 27, what we'll need to fund that, and then as well as the purchased services area, so tuition, other services the district might need moving forward of $60.6 million. From a fund balance perspective, we talked about this revised budget being 1.8 million. The goal is to have it be a deficit of 1.8 million. The goal is to get that as close to zero as we can. But wanted to show if we do have a $1.8 million deficit, our fund balance will be $500,000. I realize that's cut off, but about $500,000 at the end of 24-25. So at the end of 23-24, 2.4 million. At the end of 22-23, 6.5. So certainly want to get as close to zero here so that we can hold on to this $2.4 million and build that up as we move forward. From a Fund 27 perspective, again, this is our other largest operating fund, special education. We had budgeted $9.4 million in the June preliminary budget. We revised this to $11 million. The biggest difference here you'll see is this operating transfer. The budget was 6.2 million. We'll likely need 7.3 million to cover all those costs in the special education expenditures, as we see here. The preliminary budget was 9.4 million for special education, and we're projecting 11 million. From a total expenditure, so all funds that I talked about earlier, we're looking at an $84 million budget. When you subtract out our interfund transfer, a net expenditure of 76.6, or a reduction of 2.8%. What does this turn into in terms of tax levy? It's very early. Like I said, we don't have our enrollment, we don't have our equalized value. This could change, but at this point in time, we're looking at a reduction in school levy of 33.1 million total, or a 1.13% decrease. So this situation where we're not in a good situation, it shouldn't impact taxes from a borrowing standpoint. It does impact us from those dollars that we have to pay that debt are not going to be used for operations. Some history on our mill rate. We have seen a little steady decrease in mill rate from the fall of 2012 to the fall of 24, estimated to be $9.60. And that's all I have.
Questions from the board?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Philip.
Kristen, can you please comment on, in putting together the adjusted 24-25 budget, to what degree is that predominantly based on, I'm assuming it's predominantly based on actual expenditures as you've discovered in last year. Have you had much opportunity yet to identify, low-hanging fruit or areas where adjustments could already be made, or, short-term contracts could be non-renewed or things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think there is room to find efficiencies within the budget that we have. Salary and benefits, our actual staff right now, we have no plans for any layoffs for staff. So, and right now there is 4.12% in the budget so there are raises there. The areas that there could be more reductions are in that purchase services. I need to delve into the details to see what the district's obligated for. And remove those things that we're not. There's just a lot of things to go through to.
And those potential opportunities, I'm assuming that's what could reduce that 1.8 deficit, is if you continue to discover places where we can cut. Would we ever consider cutting a contract early that has an early termination if it ultimately benefited the district finances? Okay.
And I would also say we've done some reconfiguration from a district office perspective from a budgetary lens. There was a director of business service and a director of HR. We flattened that into one, which is Kristen's position as an assistant superintendent, so reducing the salary there. We did have a special education coordinator who took a promotion to a different district to be in a principal role, and we redistributed her role and didn't replace that at the district office. So I think as we're looking at openings that come up, instead of an automatic rehire, really thinking about what makes sense with our current context and our current situation. How can we continue to provide really good services for kids and have a good place for staff to work, but do it in a way that we can think about how we get at this 1.8.
One more question, if you don't mind. The operational loan that we're considering tonight, do we have a sense for what that impact will be? Is that part of that $1.8 million deficit, or will it add to the $1.8 million, the payments for the operational loan?
We'll add to our fund balance, essentially. It'll just give us that cash until we can replenish.
But making payments on the loan, do those payments reduce or increase our deficit throughout the year?
Only if we don't have a balanced budget and have actually deficit spend.
Gotcha.
Susan, really quick before I see your hand up, but I want to follow this thread a little bit around efficiencies, because we've been getting a lot of questions from the community around the language of non-mission critical. I'm just curious, Kristen or Tanya, if you want to speak a little bit to what that may mean.
So when we think about special education expenses. Those services are determined through the IEP process, and we're federally required to offer them. So we can't do things like say, nope, we're not going to service kids in that way. So I think of that as mission critical. One, we're federally obligated to, and also it's good practice. You know, teams decide with families what their children need, and we need to fund that. I think about the programs and the resources that kids have as far as the materials in order to teach them that teachers need. Those are mission critical. So what do people actually need to do their jobs?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, did you have a follow-up on that one?
Yeah, I did
Okay, great.
actually, which
Yes, no,
is-
it's perfect. I just want to acknowledge.
I know
that
one of the things that's been
Susan's
driving
next.
our budget lately, I mean, in the last several years, has been increasing spending on the special ed, services. Do we have, and it might be preliminary for you to ask you this, do we have a good feeling now what how the enrollment, what are the numbers for the enrollment of students receiving special ed services, how much that's changed recently in the last couple of years, and what we expect for next year?
It has risen 1.5% to 2% overall population, still very low at about 10%, like 374 students with disabilities in the district. As far as new enrollments, we haven't been able to see yet. We'll get that on third Friday count. Students that have moved out, students that come in, and if that's relatively even. I think the tricky thing gets to be a student that moves out that might have a disability, and one move in might not need the same amount of services. So you can have a very high needs situation where you have a student moves in and they have a ton of needs, and maybe a student moved out that has speech and language only. So it's not necessarily apples to apples, which makes it a little tricky for the preliminary budget, because you're projecting what you think you're going to need for services, and you don't always know who's going to show up on day one.
Susan.
So in previous years, one of the things that we had to do was we had to do a $1 million reduction in our spending for 5 years. And effectively in that process, one of the things that was done was the board would get a list of things that, just a list of expenses, particularly major expenses. And often they were based off of review by business services, looking at that, saying, these are things that require board input on reduction. One of the examples was, which is still something that haunts me seriously, and that is we have class size guidelines for our students. And, if you go down and see your grandkids in a class of 42 in the 4th grade, and at least 10 of those kids are barely reading, it's devastating to watch. So we, based on the research, we're always very committed to that issue. One of the things that occurred during that budget review was the class size guidelines were increased, not dramatically, but they were increased at the middle school, 6, 7, and 8. And that has not been changed since that occurred. So as you think of how we're going to proceed with reductions, is your thought that administration is basically going to do a full review of what's budgeted, what our expenses are, and then come with suggestions to us, or that you really are going to be able to pinpoint these from the business services point of view? I know you've talked about this, but I think it's really important. The other thing is, we did have staff and community input at that time on some of those issues. It was very limited. And it appeared as you watched the process that it was business services and board decisions on those reductions. And I'd have to go back and look at what those were. So your thought about, when I look at past process, what is what do you and Tanya foresee for us as a community, as a staff, and as a board in relation to addressing reductions?
That, Susan. I think that there's two pieces at play. First is just really digging into what have been the line item expenditures for the past 3 years, and thinking about what are reoccurring expenses, and then what are the one-time expenses. And I think eventually things will have to get looked at, such as capital improvements, right? What does a 10-year capital improvement plan look like? Because deferred maintenance for year after year, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but you can put it out there. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then really thinking about as a community, and it usually starts with the buildings and, in the district, what are critical success criteria? Like how do we deliver on the values, and what are those critical success criteria that we want to meet? We do have class size guidelines. I would push a little bit to say that they're pretty low, right? And, really thinking about what does that look like? Those are going to involve community conversations and district level conversations where we have to make decisions about when there's money's a pie, right? It's not endless. And what are we going to spend it on, and having those decisions. And so we'll have to build what that process looks like. But step one is just to figure out where's the money been going and where are we at? So we need to get a better baseline.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Janice.
About summer school.
Janice, can you just make sure you use your
Oh, yeah,
microphone
sorry.
so people online can hear you? Thank you.
We got a report on summer school, and there were more kids in summer school, and I believe we get reimbursed by the state for summer school. So does that help in any way that we had better attendance this year at summer school?
Yeah, it's a 3-year rolling average, and so it does increase revenues over time. I think in a district this size, 1,100 kids is good, but we could still capture more, and really be thinking about what are the summer activities that we pay teachers to do with kids that can be run through summer school, and then we capture that revenue. So there's some opportunities that I think Kristen has identified right off the bat that are good best practices that we can revisit, that are quicker ways to think about how do we get more money in, as opposed to just what do we stop doing.
A question for you, Kristen. So I think going back to open enrollment being a common cost that wasn't budgeted for, but also recognizing the fact, and I think we've had this discussion as the board a number of times as we're looking at our open enrollment numbers, that there is revenue too for the district. I'm just curious, in your preliminary investigation of where we've been in terms of cost and revenue, where's open enrollment looking in terms of expenditures versus revenue?
We're way ahead in terms of receiving revenue versus expenditures going out. So that's always a positive, and it's outside the revenue limit, so it is additional revenue. But one thing you want to be careful about is that you are filling empty seats and you're not creating new classrooms. Because when you create new classrooms, we get about $9,500 per student for open enrollment, whereas on a revenue limit standpoint, our revenue limit per pupil amount is much higher than that. So, and the costs, just not only with the cost of the teacher, but other ancillary costs associated with that. The best thing to do is really make sure that you're dialed in with filling those seats rather than adding classrooms.
That makes sense. Other questions? You look like you're going to say something, Peter, so I'm
It's a
just going to
complicated
stare at you for
circumstances. Yeah, thank you.
long until you speak.
I mean, I do want to, we talked about tough decisions, and I think I want to say is that the problem is we've been putting off tough decisions, in a real way. And yes, there's tough decisions, and we're going to have to make them now. But we're going to have to make them now because we haven't made them over the last couple of years. Is what it comes down to. That's the impact. We've pushed this impact off of some of the stuff off, and so now we're in a situation where it all rise at once, and that creates the difficulty that we're seeing today.
Any other questions? So in terms of next steps of the board, and we'll talk about this at future meeting dates, obviously this was discussion about preliminary budget. We need to adopt a preliminary budget, and so we'll be working in future meetings to discuss what that meeting date's going to be. It has to get adopted before the annual meeting on September 9th. And so think about that as we move forward. Also thinking to the public, part of why we wanted to put this in discussion was so that everyone here had a chance to understand it and then be able to process it and ask questions prior to the meeting where we'll be approving that budget.
And I guess I wanted to comment, we're just starting on this. The public is informed of this almost as soon as we are, really, as a board as a whole. We're processing this, and we have a lot of work to do. I think everybody knows we have a lot of work to do. And a lot of the answers, a lot of the questions about what happened, where we are, and more importantly, what we need to do in the long term to correct this and keep this from happening. But first, we have to deal with this issue of the budget and so on. So that's what our focus is on now. But we do have a lot. This is not the end of what we're doing here right now. Is not the end of this. It's just the beginning. And so there's a lot of unsaid that we haven't talked about. And it's going to take time to do the analysis and do what we need to do to come up with solutions going forward. So, and I'm sorry that we can't answer questions to people kind of have about today because we don't know the answers even ourselves, and what we're going to do in particular. But that's going to take a while. But this is the process. This is the start of the process, and I think you heard Elizabeth's statement about commitment to resolve, which is what we have to do at this point.
Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Just want to add, we should have the answers, as have been observed by many community members, and that's a big part of the problem. So I just wanted to state that for the public.
Anything else? Great. We will move on to possible action items, resolution authorizing the borrowing of not to exceed $7 million and providing the issuance and sale of general obligation promissory notes.
Ask Kevin Mullen from Baird to join us here at the table and present this item.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and recognize the importance of the topic, obviously. A couple of things. I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Kristen has already said and reinforce some of those themes. The reason that I think this is really important and obviously something that, requires this amount of attention is because it probably seems at least alarming that we're considering this in such a quick, critical timeline. And I wanted to discuss why that timeline is important and what it involves. And so a couple of things that I'm going to reiterate are going to revolve around the cash flow borrowing, and I'm going to make a distinction between cash flow borrowing, which is a tool that school districts throughout the state use to manage their annual budget, and a long-term borrowing, which is the resolution that you're considering this evening, and why those two things are different and how they relate, because they seem very similar, but they end up being very different, and a lot of good comments have been made around them already. So I have a presentation in front of you, and then am I able to advance it, Kristen, or?
My computer was frozen there for a second.
Sure. Well, I guess, while you're doing that, I'm just going to start. The first page is just a discussion about funding an operational deficit. And clearly, as was identified earlier, for the last few years, school board has been dealing with an operational deficit, and you've been using your fund balance to fund that operational deficit. So the operational deficit is just the reality that your revenues are below what your expenditures have been. So operational solutions that a board would typically look at using to satisfy an operational deficit. The first would be to, potentially reduce expenses moving forward, which is, a pathway that you are vigorously exploring right now. You also could consider additional revenues and resources. Many school districts have done that, and I know that that's, at this point, not a path that at least, specifically, the school district is considering. And then the third is obviously using fund balance. So those are all of the tools that you have available.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that the public can see the documents that he's speaking of.
That was just when the camera was here.
Yeah, so I think you're okay now.
Should I continue while we're?
Oh, wait a moment.
Okay, yep, I'll put them up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wait. Always, okay.
This is available for everybody at home who goes on board decks.
Yeah, it's in the public comments.
And is this microphone still working? It is. Great. So as we were discussing, there are. Is there a full screen? There we go. I just want to get a full screen here. There we go. Thank you. So as we were discussing earlier, funding an operational deficit, there are operational solutions that that school districts can consider with resources that you have in front of you. Reducing expenses, potentially considering additional revenue sources, or relying on fund balance. Clearly, the school district had been relying on fund balance, and that's something that was discussed earlier. Absent those tools, and as we're waiting, for example, for reductions in expenses, some of those things aren't tools that you can use immediately. School districts also have the ability to borrow funds for operational purposes on a long-term basis. And that's different than cash flow. So that's referred to as a Fund 38 loan. And the reason that it's referred to as a Fund 38 loan is because the repayments for that loan have to be done within the revenue limit of the school district. So it's not asking for additional resources to pay that loan back. You're using the resources that the school district has to make those payments. The borrowed money gets added back to fund balance and is available to you for operations. And that's what is being suggested here today, because it's necessary in order for the school district to continue with its ongoing process. And I'm going to describe that in a moment in more detail. And so we're not necessarily saying that that $7 million is going to fund additional expenditures for this year. But what it's doing is it's building back your fund balance, which has been advanced to start to spend money on the current school year, because we need to get back into a good rhythm with our cash flow borrowing and maintain the proper cadence with the district. So that Fund 38 loan can be accessed in two ways. It can be borrowed as a $1 million free exemption, again, paid for within the fund balance or the revenue limit of the school district. If it's above $1 million, it can be borrowed, but you have a 30-day petition period where you can be petitioned to referendum for that loan. Given the critical timing of where we're at and that 30-day petition period and where our current
cash flow borrowing is, it's necessary for us to consider this resolution today. And I want to talk about that just so that there's an understanding as to why that is. So as Kristen had mentioned earlier on the top chart here, I wanted to again just kind of focus back on what has happened with regard to fund balance, because that fund balance is important for a number of reasons. It's one of its primary goals or purposes is to allow the school district to bridge the gap between when the school district is making payments on its current budget and when it receives those blocky revenues that were described earlier, waiting for your blocks of tax revenue to come in or your blocks of state aid to come in, because those revenues represent roughly 80% of the school budget. And so your fund balance can help offset those timing delays. But as it gets lower, its effectiveness to do that gets diminished. And in fact, school districts are in the reality of your school year starts in July, your budget is approved in October and starts to be collected in January by and large. So you're always in this process of advancing your internal funds or borrowed money on a cash flow basis to start the school year. So presently, the current business office is updating the current budget, as you saw, and we're projecting what your cash flow looks like, because cash flow is very important. We want to make sure that, you know, the cadence of the school year is maintained in terms of people and resources getting paid for the products and services that they're providing. The Fund 38 loan is being considered to replenish your fund balance and also to provide resources if that deficit is more severe or needed in the current school year. So let's talk a little bit about your cash flow. So we've discussed this a little bit before. This chart in the middle of the page just looks at a school year that goes from July through July, and actually this one extends into October. Reason being is that our current cash flow borrowing extends into October, the school district's current borrowing. And so the red line shows the disbursements of the school district. And you can see when the school year starts in July, there are some, early expenditures, and then we kind of settle into a pretty normal rhythm, even rhythm throughout the school year. Similar to like a home budget where, your expenses are pretty similar throughout the year. What's different is if you look at total receipts on the bottom, as we discussed earlier, those receipts come in blocky pieces. We get a state aid payment in August, and then another one in December. And then tax revenues come in a little bit in January and in big portions at the end of the school year in June and again in August. And so there is a timing difference between when you're paying and when you're receiving those funds. So most school districts, as was alluded to earlier, borrow internally from their budget. They say, we've budgeted $60 million. In your case, we're going to borrow $12 million. We're going to use it at the beginning of the year out of that budgeted money. And when we get all these budgeted resources in at the end of the year, we're going to pay that cash flow note back. The security is the budget, the annual budget. One thing that is helpful is having adequate fund balance to reduce your reliance on that cash flow borrowing year in and year out. The more fund balance you have, the less pressure you have to meet those to meet those gaps. But as your fund balance gets very low, it gets exaggerated because, as we said, you're always starting the school year in anticipation of the next funding cycle. So your current cash flow borrowing, you've got two loans outstanding. You've got a traditional tax and revenue anticipation note, which is a fixed loan that comes due in September of 2024, September 24th at the end of the month. And that loan is at a fixed rate and it comes due at the end of September. You also have a taxable line of credit, which is a tool that is, again, a cash flow borrowing. You can draw on it as needed, but it needs to be paid back before your new cash flow borrowing is done. Both of those loans need to be paid back before you execute a new loan for the next school year. And so that one hopefully could be paid back on October 3rd. Our anticipation in looking at your cash flow, because we know both of these loans need to be paid back at that timeline, is that you're going to need the new cash flow to continue making payroll moving forward, because we've spent our fund balance in anticipation of getting here, and we're waiting for the revenues for next year. So we know we're going to need that. We also know that based on where the fund balance is, that we're not going to have enough funds available to make that payment in that moment. And so we want to make sure we have those funds available, build up the fund balance with the Fund 38 loan in order to make payments on the cash flow and continue that cadence. We also feel once that $7 million is in fund balance next year, at this time, we shouldn't have that timing differential. Right? So, we feel like that kind of puts us back in the rhythm. Why is that important? Well, it's important because we want to continue to make sure that the school district runs efficiently and effectively, but this also gives you time to make the qualitative and quantitative decisions that you need to make. And those can't be made in a moment because they obviously impact the community, and you want community input, and you want to have the time to be reasoned and thoughtful about what those next steps are. So again, I'm going to kind of hammer this home because I have the microphone and I think it's super important. So cash flow borrowing, that purpose is to provide temporary resources in the current budget cycle to manage your timing differential. The security for that loan, the pledge that you give is that the budget that you've adopted, there are enough resources to pay that loan once you receive all of your aid and tax revenue at the end of the year. There's a moment in time where you can pay that loan back. And that moment in time, we like to coincide with the timing around your next borrowing so that there's at least, some time in between. The larger your fund balance, the larger that amount of time between your old and your new could be. Typically, though, that's always like a 12 to 13-month cycle. The Fund 38 loan that is being used to replenish fund balance is different. Its purpose is to pay operational expenses, and in your case, also to build back fund balance. But the security pledge is an annual tax levy that is in future budgets. And again, it's not we're not looking for a new revenue. We have to use existing revenues to make that payment. So it will put pressure on future budgets and slightly on this budget because there will be a small amount of interest, some interest payment in the current budget for that loan. So the loan is to borrow for operational needs. The payments are made within the revenue limit. And as it was alluded to earlier, it requires a 30-day notice. So we can't close on that loan until that 30-day period of time has expired. The other, I think, important aspect of this is that it's considered from a federal tax standpoint to be taxable. So the interest rate on it is higher than what you would normally receive for a tax-exempt public purpose loan because it's being used for operational purposes. And so that's important to keep in mind. So when we look at a $7 million loan at an estimated taxable rate, we assumed 5.5% over a 10-year period of time. I wanted to show you what that annual payment looks like. In the first year, we're assuming it would be interest only, and then in the next budget cycle, we would have to include roughly a $986,000 payment in that budget for the loan. Now, we're anticipating that this loan would be fully callable. So if the budget improves to the point where you feel like you have the resources to pay this down, you'll have the ability to do that. But I wanted to at least show you what that looks like moving forward. So, it feels like easy path. It's not an easy path. Obviously, you're going to have to continue to, factor that in as you're budgeting and making your future considerations. And lastly, I did want to just go through and walk through that timetable because I do feel like, it might be alarming to be talking about this in this moment, but I want to discuss why that's important. So if the board is talking about it tonight, if the board approves this resolution, the first time it can appear in the newspaper and begin that Class 1 notice would be on the 29th of August. 30 days from there puts us at the end of September. meaning that the loan funds would be available early in October. We could then pay off the taxable line of credit on October 3rd. We feel like we have the resources available to pay the other piece off with funds within the district. But that would then clear the path in early October to issue our new tax and revenue anticipation note for the continuation of the school year into the next budget. And I think that's obviously very important for maintaining the cadence of service moving forward. So a lot of information, probably not your favorite presentation, but I'm very open to questions if you have any.
Questions?
No, I mean, I don't understand. I understand what's going on. We've been through this process before. Essentially, we don't have the fund balance to pay off our current cash flow borrowing, and we're using this to pay off the current cash flow borrowing, and we're shifting expenses we had in the past to the future, essentially, through this. Now, ultimately, the long-term fiscal impact is the interest, right? Not the principal. But we're shifting, shifting through time, essentially paying for some of the things that we had. But the long-term fiscal impact, which is the interest, which is substantial, it's not insubstantial if this goes out over the 10 years or that you have shown. It's not insubstantial. I don't want to minimize that, but that's
right.
Not the principle. Is not a new expense to the district.
Philip?
I have a couple of questions. One, does having a loan like this on our books have any other side effects to the district?
Well, I think, this is.
Besides monetary.
Monetary, well, I think it implies, I think the school district's credit rating will probably certainly be reviewed as a result of, this conversation and where you're at financially. This would probably, be a step that would be considered a part of the cure, but it probably won't be the full cure. So I wouldn't say that borrowing is necessarily the thing that is going to weigh the credit rating down, but it's likely that we would see a reduction in the credit rating because of the budget situation. So that will cause interest costs to be slightly higher than it otherwise would have been. So that's one. And I do think,
just to clarify, you're saying other borrowing might be more expensive
correct,
because we have this.
And probably this as well, slightly compared to where you were before to where you are now. Probably 5 to 10 basis points. So the difference between a 5 and a 5.10, if it's one credit notch, hard to quantify in this moment, but and then I do think there is obviously pressure on future budgets because those payments for those future loan payments will be made out of future budgets and within your revenue limits. So there will be pressure there.
My other question is, if we approve this tonight, do we have an opportunity to go a different direction between now and 30 days from now, or when the notice period would be up? Or are we committing tonight to doing this regardless?
You're not. You could obviously not borrow the money. You could borrow less. You can't borrow more because we're not noticing more. You're not committed to doing the borrowing.
That's my main question.
Yep.
If
yes, correct.
Some alternative or some different path that we want to take, or borrow less or something like that. I just
Correct.
want to clarify that we're not committing right now to.
That is correct. Right.
Change course. Okay.
But we would not have the ability to borrow in 30 days if we had not started the process.
Agree. Understand. Yep.
Susan?
Kristen, would you just speak to the point? I know one of the concerns expressed by the community tonight was that we didn't necessarily, or we would approve something without asking questions. And again, I was frequently reprimanded for asking questions, but that's okay, because Elizabeth has been great about that. Particularly if I haven't approached that individual prior to the meeting and indicated I was going to answer that question, ask that question. But as we go forward, I do have this question, and I think in terms of transparency, effectively, we've seen some great presentations on the last 3 or 4 days. And the community, the staff has seen most of those. The community hasn't necessarily seen those, even though they're posted. It would be helpful, I think, for me personally, as a board member, and also for transparency, to have you, so for instance, what we get in the, if someone's looking at the board agenda, basically what they'll see is type, action, and again, at 4 o'clock, I hadn't seen these documents posted, so I didn't even have good time to review them. But most of it we've already seen. I want to make that clear. I would appreciate hearing from you. So it says recommended action. So your statement as our business manager and anything you want to add as our superintendent is your rationale, just in general terms, because you basically have presented it, for recommending moving approval of the resolution authorizing the borrowing.
We won't have money to pay our bills. We need to issue this loan, or we won't have money to pay our bills. It just comes down to that.
And that is based on the information you have already provided in terms of, and would you reiterate that, what's left in the fund balance?
Have enough cash in our fund balance to cover our expenditures until we get our new short-term cash flow. And our fund balance is at such a low point that we really need this to replenish that so that we're in a good spot moving forward into the next budget year. And that way we can plan on, how we're gonna right things, right the ship, so to speak.
Again, I greatly appreciate that. It's now recorded. Anyone can watch it. And they can see that even though we may have received that information before, it's out in the community and the public in this meeting to show that we needed to know that and that we do have that information. So I appreciate that input. And Tanya, was there anything you felt you needed to add?
I think Peter has a question too, if you don't have anything to add, Tanya.
Just could you give us a rundown of why the $7 million, how you reached the $7 million figure?
So we do a cash flow analysis with the assistance of Baird, and we take a look at cash flow that we anticipate receiving based on past years and what we know moving forward in terms of what our aid will be and the timing of that and our fund balance. And the low point for us was we needed that $7 million to carry us through so that we can have a successful cash flow borrowing for the 24-25 year. So the cash flow itself identifies the need, and it's a legal requirement to include it in all the documents to support the resolution and to support the borrowing, which is why we had to do a revised budget that showed real expenditures that would support that cash flow. So it's all sort of tied together.
Other questions from the board? Quick question. Can you explain the petition period and what that entails?
And so, it really begins whenever, but the official timing starts when the Class 1 notice is published in the paper. And the public has the ability to get signatures to petition the board to go to referendum on this because, the board, absent receiving a petition, would have, it's implied that you have the authority to issue that borrowing. If the petitions are filed, then you would have to go through the referendum process to ask for the authority to borrow that money, which, would not be able to happen until April of 2025. But, well, I guess you could do it in February of 2025.
Okay, so just so I'm understanding, the petition period then would be the community saying you have to go to referendum and ask the community in order to borrow.
Yes.
Not referendum in terms of raising revenue limits referendum. So
Correct.
different type of referendum.
Correct. It would to borrow within
Yep.
the revenue limit
Yep.
for this purpose, yes. The statute gives you free authority, meaning the board could do that with just board action for an amount up to $1 million. But because it's more than $1 million, it requires the 30-day petition period.
That makes a lot of sense.
Just to reiterate, if we don't borrow, we won't have enough money.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, did Rochelle have a
Well,
question?
and some of that money is going to pay back our other loan, and so, which is necessary as well.
It puts the finances in a position where there's no longer a deficit. And so, I guess in terms of thinking of it in broad terms, the fund balance has been drawn down over a period of 3 years. We're now putting that fund balance back in place, borrowing for those deficits that occurred previously, but we're going to have to pay them out of future budgets over the next 10 years. So, that having that fund balance is necessary not just for this year to show that we have, funds on hand to make the current cash flow payment, but when we get to this point next year, hopefully there's not a large draw on fund balance, and we won't need to do that again, that cadence will continue. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, you're at a point where you're building back fund balance, and then the board, can make decisions about how to move forward with the balance of the loan.
And I would just note that we run into this situation every year, and we do, whereas we couldn't pay the bills without doing short-term borrowing, simply because of this difference between when we have expenses and when the revenue comes in. And obviously this is an unusual and different circumstance, but we do run into this every year where we couldn't pay the bills if we didn't have the cash flow borrowing.
And we'll be back again to the board asking for a cash flow borrowing for the 24-25 year. But this is just step one to get us to that point.
And I would like to mention that this board, particularly one board member, Mr. Sobel, has been adamant about retention of the fund balance. He has questioned it. He has advocated it for it, and in fact, advocated for 25 versus 15%. So as a board, we listened to that voice and we supported that voice. So you'll go back to the question. So if you did that, how did this happen? And I think that Kristen and Tanya have done an excellent job of putting that forward. And we all take responsibility for where we are now. And I think individually and as a group and a team, we are incredibly committed to fixing this.
Other questions or comments? Can I have a motion, please?
Approval of the resolution authorizing the borrowing of not to exceed $7 million and providing for the issuance and sale of general obligation promissory notes as presented. And I point out for those, the authorizing resolution is part of the public documents and board docs, if anybody wants to read the details on that.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? I did have one follow-up question before we do roll call vote, and just to more clearly understand, I understand this component of it, and then I understand it loosens up our ability to short-term borrow in a more traditional way. I think where it's still a little, I don't think it's unclear, but it's a little bit hard to process around, we're going to borrow to cover deficit, which is going to loosen this piece up, and then at the expense, essentially, right, of next year's budget. And so kind of what does that process look like? Or is that part of kind of trying to right-size this budget and thinking about those, non-mission critical things as we move forward? Because it's hard to reconcile, we have to build up fund balance and we're going to have additional $900,000 bill to pay off, right? So.
And I know it's hard we're sort of at like step one.
Oh.
In October, step two, and then it's, let's build a process to, how we're going to get through this and identify, how we can get in a better financial position. And, looking into the budget, I want people to know, I think there are efficiencies within our budget that aren't going to be devastating to, our operations. So I think we can get there. We can get there together. So I just, don't want people to think that this is going to be awful and.
Sort of perpetual.
So if you think about, we used $7 million of our fund balance in the past 2 years. This is just basically to say, we're going to get $7 million and put it back in that fund balance. And we do have that payment every year, so we'll have to plan for it. But it's just to get our fund balance level up to the point where it used to be, where we could go through the regular cadence of the cash flow borrowing, give us time to plan. And if we, get in a position where we can pay it off early and save on that interest, that would be great. We do get $6.2 million in our recurring referendum in the 25-26 school year, so that should help. It'll be the first year of the second biennium, where if we get additional dollars per pupil, that will help the district too. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, with some of those things happening down the road. This is just to get us through so that we can plan and get to a better spot.
I appreciate that, Kristen. Thank you. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add there? Oh.
Super well said, thank you.
All right, any further discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it seems like at the very least, we need to approve this to get the clock ticking, and that's prudent to do tonight. But I want to acknowledge that the position we've put the community in with the petition period is inappropriate in the sense that they don't really have a choice, right? That if they wanted to push this out to referendum, the timetable doesn't allow for that. And I just want to acknowledge the tough spot that we're putting the community in with this, where we're opening up a petition period that we don't really have a lot of flexibility around. So, but I do think that, from what I understand, this is something that we need to at least get that clock ticking now.
I appreciate that acknowledgement, Philip. Anything else? All right, let's do a roll call vote. Rochelle? Aye. Susan?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Janice? Elizabeth, aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, the last thing on our agenda is future meeting dates. So there's kind of two things I want to discuss with the board. One is around setting a meeting so that we can approve the preliminary budget that was presented in discussion today. The second is, and I think this is an important thing for the public as well, around kind of how do we do next steps, right? We've talked a lot about, checks and balances, processes and procedures, all of those things. All of those are board decisions that need to happen in board discussion in open meeting. And so what I would like to talk about with the board, and then we can potentially put it on a future agenda item, is we had originally at the beginning of our year as a board set a schedule of regular meetings once a month. I think given, one, the severity of the situation and just our need to be timely in our planning, I would like to recommend that we move to 2 meetings a month for regular board meetings, which I know is something that we talked about in April. But I'd like to kind of get general board discussion on that. And then we'll have to put it on as an action item in order to officially change the schedule to regular meetings. Regular meetings versus special meetings also allow us to live stream them, which I think is incredibly important. Traditionally, we don't live stream special meetings except under extenuating circumstances, right? During COVID, during sometimes we did. This meeting obviously is live streamed, but our work with Monona Community Media is mostly for regular meetings. So I wanted to name that for the board too, as we're thinking about regular cadence, predictable for the community, and also live streamed and archived. So thoughts on that? Yes, Rochelle.
I think it's a good idea and necessary, and it allows, like you were saying, for the community to put it on their calendar, and so nobody is surprised and can watch it at home, and it sets us up for better dialogue with members.
I also support it.
Janice or Peter, do you have any thoughts there?
I kind of wanted 2 a month anyway, so I think we have a lot of work to do, and I think 2 a month makes a lot of sense, so yeah.
Peter, do you have any thoughts about that, or? We're not deciding now, just kind of curious where the board's standing.
We're not deciding now, because really what I think we need to do is to think about not whether we need another board meeting, but do we need something else? We used to have something else where we would do, there were committee meetings, there were some more substantial committee meetings.
Right.
There was a board, there was, for example, as was mentioned, there was
Business Services
a
Committee.
Business Service Committee, which I think we've been missing for a while. And the question is, what's the appropriate way to do that? And is it 2 meetings a month of the board? I don't know. But of course, for the short term, that's a different story.
Yeah.
So I hadn't thought about this question, but
Yeah.
I would just want to know that's the right thing to do, that's all. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I think that that's fair to think about
mean-
kind of what that meeting ought to be.
Right.
I think what's clear is that we need to meet more. How and who and what. So if it is all right with everyone else for our kind of next board meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
I just wanted to make one comment about that. So when we went to one board meeting a month, one of the things that I discussed at the time was, let's just schedule 2, and if we don't need the other one, we can cancel it. But at least we have that time scheduled. And one of the things our superintendent has tried to do is schedule a board workshop with us. The other thing that we always did, or at least tried to do, was have not just a superintendent report on a particular piece. We had a full presentation on this part of the curriculum or this particular program. And the other thing that at least I've been working on right now, and again, we've had a great, just so everybody understands, we've had a great policy committee. And that's one of the reasons we have policies to hold us accountable. I think what we needed to do was more instruction on what the policies required. So one of the things I've been just doing is starting to go through the policies and look at what the policy requirements are for reporting out to the board.
I think, Susan, you're talking importantly around
About
meeting,
time to
about meeting,
present that.
about meeting substance and meeting topics, which I think are very relevant. I think right now we're trying to just come to a discussion around meeting cadence.
One of the pieces that when I would request that presentation was, we don't have time in that meeting. And we had gone to one meeting a month. And I think in all honesty, in the month of July particularly, you start to feel disconnected because, except we have a superintendent that's giving us Friday reports all the time, but you're not right there having the discussion about what's occurring within the district. The programs that we're doing, a presentation on the summer school, we can, if we don't need the time to present information to this board, we don't have to hold the meeting. But if it's scheduled, I mean, it gives Tanya a chance to have a board workshop.
Yeah, I hear it acknowledge your desire to have 2 meetings a month, Susan.
Well, I'm not loving having it, but I haven't seen that we can adequately function without at least planning that way.
All right, so we'll plan on the September 11th meeting, having that as a possible action item. We can discuss at that point, regular board meeting, something else, and then vote that up or down. And then, like I shared, the budget has to get adopted prior to the annual meeting on the 9th. And so we can do some scheduling outside of this meeting on making sure that we're able to get that done. Anything else in terms of future meeting? Yes, Susan?
I just want to ask, is there an expectation that the board attends the annual meeting?
That has always been my expectation.
I always thought there was, but that hasn't always occurred. Understanding you may not be there at that time, you may be watching it virtually, there may be other things going on, but
I can review the policy and get back to you, but I will say for my board colleagues, my hope and expectation is that everyone is there at the annual meeting. So September 9th.
That's great.
Mark your calendars, public, mark your calendar, September 9th. Kristen will do an amazing presentation. You got a preview of it today, and hopefully, we'll adjourn here in a minute, but hopefully the community, I know we've really been espousing our confidence in the two of them, but hopefully Kristen's presentation today was a little bit of like proof of was gonna say proof of purchase, which sounds really weird and transactional, Kristen, and I'm sorry, but sort of like proof in the pudding around just Kristen specifically's ability to not only understand this, but describe it in a way that feels digestible, understandable, and relatable. So I want to thank you for your presentation today. And there is a recording on the budget page that goes kind of through this in a very truncated version. So if you want to go back and watch that instead of scrolling through the YouTube, you're welcome to. Anything else for the good of the group? Yes, Susan.
A question, and I know you're saying we're going to discuss this later, about 2 meetings, at least scheduling 2 meetings a month, will we be considering the same scheduling we were doing before second and?
We'll talk about that. It has to be agendized because we formally adopted a schedule, and so we have to re-formally adopt a schedule. Yep. Anything else for the good of the group? Yes, Tanya.
Just so everyone knows, as we continue to gather questions from the community, Katie and her team will be continuing to update the frequently asked questions, because I think that, we heard questions tonight that we maybe haven't addressed on there yet, so we will add those and put the answers, so we'll continue to do that. So please continue to ask your questions, share those with us, and we will work to populate the information that you will have, and then any documents that go with it that are public record.
Well, and would you just clarify to the community, particularly when emails come in?
I was just going to say that, Susan, because that came up today as a question. So just a reminder to the community that by policy, the board president is the only one authorized to speak on behalf of the board. The board president, it does have the ability to delegate in certain circumstances. And so as you are sending emails to us on this topic or any topic, the expectation is that the board president is responding, and other board members may respond, but they don't have to respond, and their views are their personal views and not reflective of the board. So just as a reminder of policy there.
And you have to clarify that in your message if you send a return message, that you are only speaking for yourself, not for the board.
Oh, sure. Just as a reminder to board members as you're using your board email, just make it clear to folks that we're not speaking on behalf of the board.
And I just want to say, as a board member, I read everything that comes through. So it's being appreciated. The communication is helpful.
Anything else before we adjourn today?
Adjourn.
Second that.
Voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned at 8:04 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That's good.